Hi, everyone. My name is Camilla Reese. I'm the Utah Marriage Commission Coordinator, and I'm super excited to welcome our special guest, Dr. Stacy Jones. Dr. Jones specializes in treating trauma and has been studying trauma for over 15 years. She's been trained in EMDR for over 10 years as well. She also does research on the neuroplasticity of the brain and in the role that bilateral movement plays in activating the right and left sides of the brain to enhance physical and emotional health. Over the past 13 years, Dr. Jones has worked with couples, families, and individuals from nearly every walk of life and with nearly every presenting concern imaginable. Today, Dr. Jones's presentation is titled "A Deep Dive into Growing Calm and Connection Through Conflict," where you will learn about why your brain and body responds the way it does when it comes to conflict, attachment, and emotion, and how to use the new knowledge you learn here today to grow emotionally closer with your partner when faced with conflict. There will be an anonymous Q&A session with Dr. Jones for the final 15 to 20 minutes of this 1-hour webinar. Please feel free to write down your questions as they come up and save them for the Q&A portion of the workshop. This workshop is also approved for 1 continuing education credit. You can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu to request a certificate. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for joining us. I'm going to turn the time to you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you. I appreciate your time. It's the end of the day. I'm sure you're tired. So I'll try to make it a little bit as entertaining as I can and make it worth your time as much as possible. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background information about me. I know she gave an intro there, and so I do a lot of neuroplasticity research. I've created a technology stress management wearable, so I do a lot of tech innovation, and I'm also a therapist, marriage and family therapist that specializes in trauma. And so I've kind of combined those 3 things as the main sources of information as I've kind of created this presentation. And so I'm just going to go over a little bit really quickly about the different companies I have, and just in the event that the only reason why is in the event that they're a resource to you and potentially a resource. I'm not interested in selling anything at all. If there's anything that would be helpful. So the 2 companies that I have are Thertech, which is a clinic here in Logan, Utah. It specializes in utilizing technologies that calm the brain on the go. And we'll talk a little bit about why that piece is important. So it utilizes my technology as well as other technologies out there that we know are efficacy based and that really help calm the brain. And then the specific technology that I created is called Brain Sculpt. And Brain Sculpt is a tactile bilateral stimulation device. So you kind of put it on and it calms your brain on the go. So let's give a little bit of background here. Oh, it's weird, it's not moving. Let's see here. There we go. You'll find that me and technology, ironically, don't often get along. So if there's another little fluke, I wouldn't be surprised. It's kind of ironic that I've got this tech company because, like I said, it's a complicated relationship. But anyway, so Brain Sculpt, we kind of see it as a support tool to the mental health treatment process. One thing that's tricky about mental health treatment is it's typically 1 hour a week, and to a neuroplastic brain, that's like a little blip. There's 168 hours in the week. And one thing that we'll be talking about in this presentation is how essential real-time change is. Like making an impact in that moment. If you really want to rewire the brain, that's essential. A lot of things are hard to do retrospectively. So that's one of the focuses of the technology. It's kind of got these 2 different branches. Brain Sculpt Tech is the stress management wearable that calms the brain. It's got some in-app meditations that sync it with the bilateral. And we'll talk more about what tactile bilateral stimulation is. I'll give you kind of the whole background as to why that's important, not just in the technology, but just in life in general and what that does for the brain. But so there's kind of like that one piece of it. And then the other part of our company is Brain Sculpt Connect. And Brain Sculpt Connect is the free psychoeducation resources we have. So we've got a podcast that we've just barely started. We'll be developing a webinar or a YouTube channel. So that way, I just got a question about if it's safe when to use when you're pregnant. Yes, it is. And I'm sorry, I just realized I need to say those to the end, but please ask whatever questions that you have. I'm super excited to be able to start answering those when we get towards the end of the presentation. But anyway, so BrainScope Connect is all about how you can use calm to create connection, because those are the two things the primitive brain needs. And we're going to talk a lot about this, of how, of all the things that the brain needs to really not only just survive, but thrive. It needs calm and it needs connection. So that's a lot of what our psychoeducation programs are about. They're all free. We've got some podcasts you can follow, and the contact information for that is in this webinar. And there's kind of like the little information about the podcast and how to follow that. Okay, so let's jump into the content. I really do believe that the two most critical needs we have as humans are for calm and connection. And these are really interdependent in the sense that they build and they grow one another. They have a lot in common, and the most commonality, or the biggest commonality that they have, is that they both revolve around the fight or flight response. Now, you wouldn't think that connection is really dependent on that fight or flight response, but actually it is. And so in terms of making any change in your life, if you're trying to have a better relationship with somebody, if you're trying to have a better relationship with yourself, if you're trying to heal from trauma, I mean, any of these things right here, dealing with performance anxiety, parenting stresses, depression, all of that stuff, fight or flight is at the core of what's going on there. It's probably not the whole picture, but it's a big part of the picture. And so whenever you're trying to help create change in you, and whenever you're trying to help create change in someone else, just know that unless the fight or flight response is addressed, that change is going to be tricky. And there's a lot of kind of like myths, I think, in terms of how you calm down the fight or flight response, and what are the most helpful things to do in the right order. And we're going to go over a lot of that tonight. So in a lot of ways, I don't know about you, but I'm going to make, I'm going to make a guess that in your life, you're probably feeling pretty stressed and somewhat disconnected, if not really disconnected. I think as a society, especially post-COVID, those two things are pretty prominent in your life. And I'm pretty willing to bet that a lot of people in your life, people that you love, feel the same way, because connection is not about being around people. Connection is not about having access to people. We have incredible access to one another, but there's not a lot of deep connection. And so we're going to get to the heart of what really builds those connections. But the reality is that stability in our life is dependent on how well these two things are going in our life. And it's interesting because we grow them. It's so often we kind of have that feeling or that idea that we need to hurry and become calm, and we need to hurry and become connected. It's like you've either arrived or you haven't, or you know how to do it or you don't, or you have it in your life or you don't. And the reality is that we grow these things within the brain, very much like you grow some small little seed that you're trying to nurture over time. As we nurture those capacities in our brain, and as we nurture those capacities in the lives of those that we love, we have more and more ability to get there quickly. But it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not black or white, and it's something that we can get better at over time. So there's a saying I often say, in terms of the order of how you want to go about creating calm, there's really like this multi-step approach. And the first is that you've got to calm your body, to craft your brain, or it's actually supposed to say to prime your brain to change your mind. So oftentimes, I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, but this is kind of what was taught for a while, that if you wanted to calm your body, or if you wanted to change a fight or flight response, that you should focus first on changing your thoughts of, okay, just tell yourself not to be anxious, or convince yourself that whatever it is that's stressing you out isn't that big of a deal, or try to convince the people that you love that what they're stressing out about is not that big of a deal. And the reality is, it's very much like trying to shift in a car without the clutch being in. If that body isn't calm, your brain can't be primed to change your mind. And those are three different things. Your body and your brain and your mind are three different components of that fight or flight process. And so one thing that's really tricky, and I'm sure you may have experienced if you deal with any anxiety, which so many of us do, me included, is that a neuroplastic brain gets really good at doing what it does a lot of. And so that means anxious brains get better and better at becoming anxious. And it's really frustrating because it is a skill set that your brain, because it does often, it does quicker, it does more coordinated in a more coordinated way with the rest of the brain, and more strongly. And so we used to think that the brain was like a machine, and like there were like these little parts of it that didn't really change that much, and that they each have like their own specific function, and they only did that specific function. And we found that's actually not true at all. The brain is a lot more like a muscle, and so certain parts of the muscle that get exercised more become stronger. And actually, as one part of the brain gets strong, there's even something that's called competitive neuroplasticity, which is when the regions around that part of the brain can start becoming good at the task that the adjacent region is good at. That's part of why chronic pain grows. That's part of why anxiety grows. It's because literally that part of the brain is getting a lot of exercise, so it just becomes really efficient at it. And so in terms of calming down the body first, there's a lot of different things that can help with that. I know we talk a lot about breathing patterns and things like that. Those are really important. One breathing pattern in particular that tends to be helpful is what's called cardiac coherence breathing. Because part of what happens when you're dealing with the fight or flight response is that your heart rate and your breathing patterns become somewhat disconnected to one another. And your heart rate becomes really erratic. It doesn't have a consistent flow. And so one of the best ways you can calm your body down is by calming down your heart, and you do that through breathing. So if you haven't heard of cardiac coherence breathing, it's probably one of the most effective breathing patterns that are out there. You can just YouTube it. There's a ton of stuff out there. But another thing that we often don't think of is the role that movement plays in calming the body down. Now, I know that when we're in stress scenarios, oftentimes, ironically, we're in situations where we're not allowed to move. And we're going to talk about the impact that has on the brain in a moment. But the reality, if you think about one thing that we all have in common, is that our brain was built in the presence of a lot of bilateral movement. So all of us, when we were in the womb, our brains were developing as we were being rocked back and forth, as our mothers walked around. And as that happened, I don't know if any of you have been pregnant, but if you have, you can resonate with this. I mean, how many times have we had those moments where we're exhausted, when we're pregnant and we sit down, and as soon as we sit down, then our little ones inside of us start waking up and they start kicking and they're active and alert. It's because the whole rest of the day, as we've been walking around, they've been lulled to calm and relaxation and rest. And it's frustrating as a mom because it's like you can never get any sleep. But what that has done for all of us is primed our brain to connect a sense of calm and soothing with this bilateral movement, this right and left. And that's why when babies are born, we rock them to soothe them and to calm them. And that's across the board. There's no demographic feature really related to that. It's a human phenomenon that we rock our babies, and that just tends to calm and soothe them. And so, and the tricky thing is that our need for bilateral doesn't really change throughout the life course. We still need it, and as a society we need it, but we don't do it anymore. If you think about what life used to be like in societies, and the amount of time that people spent moving their bodies, they had to grow their food, they had to walk to work, they had to ride a horse is bilateral. They had to tend the flock, like almost all daily living tasks required movement. And when you think about the primitive brain and what it was designed to do, it was designed to be aware of the tiger in the grass and then to move away from it. And what has happened in our society is that we don't move in the presence of our stress anymore. We drive to work and we ride a bus to school and we sit on a computer for 6 to 8 hours a day, some of us, and we're on our phones when we're not on our computers. And when we're at home, we're in front of screens, and so much of the day is spent still in the presence of stress. That is not what the biological brain was designed to do, what it was built to do. And when that ongoing stress happens in the presence of still and calmness, you're not activating the right, left, and parts of the brain. You're not moving your body. You're not getting blood flow. You're not getting oxygen. You know, the right and left parts of your brain have very different jobs to do. And if they're both not online or activated, when you're dealing with stress, it results in these neural network patterns that are more likely to develop symptoms like anxiety, depression. That's a big reason why we're seeing these huge spikes, is because we're not moving our bodies in the presence of stress. And so in terms of calming your body down, it's not just about getting it to be still. In fact, most of the time, a still body does not equal a quiet mind. A lot of the times, especially for little ones, they have to move. They've got to wrestle it out. You know, a lot of what we think as kind of chaotic behavior for them is literally their bodies and their brains trying to work out the stress. And they have so few opportunities to do that. So if you ever have a chance to move more in the presence of your stress, go on a walk. You know, there's lots of different ways of getting bilateral. You can run and play, you can go on a walk, go on a hike, anything with knitting. Think about what people used to do. I just think it's insane how so quietly these things have just been kind of taken out of our day. But how often would we see people or think of others, you know, at the end of a long day, they'd sit on the front porch, they'd rock and they'd knit. That is so soothing for the brain. That is brilliant. But we don't do it anymore. And so if we're wondering why we're so stressed, I can guarantee you the lack of movement in the presence of your stress is part of what's going on. There's other ways that you can activate parasympathetic. There's these little buttons you can push, you know, breathing exercises, of course, that's good. Stretching, any type of engagement in the senses. One thing that tends to happen with the fight or flight response is that the visual cortex becomes very activated, especially when you're dealing with any type of trauma. If you're dealing with a trauma response, the visual cortex is highly activated. And so that means we want to engage the other sensory channels within the brain. So that way the visual cortex isn't quite so dominant. So engaging the senses, being outside, laughing, yawning actually is like a little button to engage the parasympathetic. Time outside, again, because it engages the senses. And then of course, meditation, yoga. So I know those are all about, they're easier said than done. But again, whenever you're trying to calm that fight or flight response, calming that body down really needs to be that first step, because if you don't do that, you're not being able to prime the brain to change the mind. So let's talk a little bit about enhancing connection. One thing that is really, I think, counterintuitive to connection is that it typically occurs in the presence of vulnerability. So I define vulnerability to be any type of scenario where you're distressed, sick, tired, overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, scared, rejected. I mean, how many of those emotions do we feel in a day? So many of them. And so what really builds connection is a sense of calm and support in the presence of that vulnerability. So in so many ways, and in contradiction to what I think most of us have been taught about conflict, and what we might even still experience in the presence of conflict, is that conflict is actually a bid for connection. So there's something that's called, okay, so let me go back a little bit. So yeah, it's a bid for connection. And the reality is that connection is built in the storm. So I love this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures, I think, of all time, because to me, this is what the human emotional cycle looks like. You know, we've got these nice sunny days, and then we've got kind of the buildup of a storm, and then we have a full-blown storm, and then we have a storm that's kind of calmed down, and then it goes back into sunny days. And really, in terms of neurobiology, this is how stress processes through the brain. This is how stress processes through the body. There's got to be storms for the sunny skies to come through. And I think that we feel a lot of pressure in our relationships, and we feel a lot of pressure even within ourselves, that we're just supposed to have these sunny skies all the time. And that if we're not having sunny skies, then something's wrong in our relationship. Something's amiss. Something's happening that shouldn't be happening. And actually that is not true. Neurologically, the brain has to offload stress. And what does offloading look like? It looks like a lot of stuff that we're taught isn't supposed to happen. Or if it does, we feel like we need to hurry and close it down quickly. So, babies crying, bullying, teasing is a huge way that offloading occurs. Disrespect, fighting. The thing is that we don't outgrow this. It changes shape and form as we grow and as we age, but it doesn't go away. The need to offload doesn't go away. Now, we don't ever want to cause harm when we're offloading. But the reality is that neurobiologically, it is a need that the brain has. And what happens if it doesn't offload right, or if it doesn't offload at all, is that the stress can't roll through. And there's often like a peak, there's a wave, stress in the body and stress in the brain comes in the form of waves, and so do emotions. They build, kind of right here in the middle of this slide, they build, then they peak, and then eventually they go back down. But what happens for a lot of conflict is that right at the peak, it's shut down. Right at the peak, before the thing that actually allows it to turn that corner and start going down, before that peak occurs, it's told to stop, it's told to go away, it's told that it can't be here, it's told that it's not supposed to happen. And so what happens neurologically within the brain is that the brain goes from kind of like an offloading set to more of that, just that freeze, that shutdown. And whatever gets frozen in a fight or flight response gets, what's the right word to say this? Gets stored deeply. And so what happens if you're having repeat conflict about the same thing, almost in the same pattern, in any dynamic, whether it not be, partner or even parent-child, sometimes even work conflict. It's more so for attachment-based relationships. But if you're having like these repeat conversations that just, it's like we just had this yesterday, why are we having this again? I'm willing to bet that part of the reason why is because right when it gets to its peak, it gets shut down, and it doesn't get to roll over to the calming down part that eventually goes into the blue skies. So what happens is if it gets shut down when it's like next close to where all this electricity is starting to go off, which we often do shut it down because it can be overwhelming to us as well. It tends to just go back a few steps. It doesn't even go into the blue skies. It's like having this perpetual storm, and it kind of waxes and wanes from like super thundery and lightning to just drizzly, lightning, thunder, drizzly. It's like if things aren't able to really do like the full course, it never goes into blue skies. And I think that's where just fatigue comes in relationships. You can call that caregiver fatigue, you can call it lots of different things, but just we get so tired of being in that storm. So we're going to talk a little bit about a critical piece of that storm. That is what helps it start to roll into some of those blue skies. So I found that people tend to have one of three responses to vulnerability. They either turn away from it, and so turning away would look like kind of like a fighting against it. But no, sorry, turning away is a numbing out. So say we have conflict with somebody. And these are things that we do within ourselves as well. So turning away would be like, okay, we're not going to talk about it. Let's push it under the rug. Let's let it be the elephant in the room that we never really address. Or let's just physically distance, emotionally distance. People become kind of the ships passing the night. Or within ourselves, we kind of avoid those aspects of ourselves that are uncomfortable, or we tell ourselves to just get over it, and I shouldn't feel this way, and this doesn't need to be looked at, and so we're turning away. That's actually a fight or flight response. That's fleeing from the vulnerability. Turning against is the opposite. That's for a lot of criticism. Does the fighting the vulnerability, why are you sick again? Why can't you figure this out? What's wrong with you? Just a lot of criticizing and name calling and belittling. A lot of that is turning against the vulnerability. And what we want to aim for is turning towards the vulnerability. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you, actually, it doesn't mean at all that you agree with what's going on in the scenario. It's not about your response to the problem. This is all about your response to the person and the vulnerability within them. So the core emotions, that core distress, if they're sick, if they're scared, if they feel belittled, if they feel alone, that we're turning towards that and we're identifying that. And instead of saying, well, what's wrong or go away, we turn towards it and we accept it. And I can we'll talk a little bit later about what that can really look like. But the tricky thing about this is that we tend to deal with the vulnerability of others the way that others dealt with ours. So our patterns towards this stuff actually has very little to do with our partner relationships. This stuff was developed long ago. And it was developed, in early childhood. And we can change these patterns. Like, they're not set in stone. Again, we can grow these things in our lives. It's not like we're either safely attached or we're not. We grow that safe attachment over time. But we respond to others' vulnerability the ways that others responded to us. So I want you to think for a moment, just in the family you grew up in, how was vulnerability dealt with? When you were scared, tired, sick, distressed, overwhelmed, alone, how did people respond to you? Did they turn away? Did they turn against? Or did they turn towards? So just take a moment and think about that. Most often it's the caregivers, those that cared for you, that kind of set these patterns up. So let's go back. Now I want you to think, what are your responses like to others, especially those that you're close to? Again, this is not about our neighbors or our friends. These are our responses to those that we're attached to and our responses to ourselves. Do you turn away? Do you turn against? Or do you turn towards? And I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of similarity between those two things. How others dealt with yours and how you deal with others. And I would say kind of like the heartbeat of changing attachment patterns is knowing how to change these tendencies and how to infuse love and nurture and support in those moments. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, but absolutely these patterns can change. They're not set in stone. We have a lot of choice in regards to how this goes. So much of dealing with vulnerability is not about creating solutions. I know we hear this over and over again, but it is really hard to avoid it, but it's absolutely true. It's not about creating solutions. It's about not being alone in the problems. That's how you turn towards vulnerability. So it's not about figuring out what is making somebody upset and knowing how to change those things or align with those things or agree with those things. It's actually not about that at all. It's just about giving that person that authentic message that we're in it with them, that they're not alone. And one of the best ways that we can honestly do that is a simple statement that just says, I just want to be in this moment with you. I'm not going to try to change your emotions. I'm not going to try to change your thoughts, your beliefs. I'm not going to try to change you because I'm not interested in changing you in this vulnerability. I just want to be with you. And something powerful happens in those moments when we can really do that with people. One thing that changes is that their brain gets out of fight or flight. It's one of the most effective ways to get somebody out of fight or flight. It's not about creating specific thought patterns that don't make them stressed anymore. It's about not being alone in it. If you think about, again, that primitive brain, it was designed to see the tiger in the grass, to move away from the tiger and come back to the tribe. And when people feel alone in their stress, that there's no tribe to come back to, they stay in fight or flight. And I would say the bottom line for most of the anxiety that I've seen both professionally and personally and in lots of different realms as I've been doing this research is the sense of being not enough, unlovable, insignificant. You know, so much of the anxious mind is about scanning for threats around that. So when we give people that moment with them, when they're truly being vulnerable, and we're just in that moment with them, and this is really a nonverbal thing to do. We'll talk about that. This doesn't require a lot of words. The less words, the better. Then you engage their parasympathetic response. And that is what moves it here, moves it from the lightning and the thunder. It's not about finding solutions. It's about not being alone in the storm. And when people do not feel alone in the storm and they truly feel seen and heard, it starts to transition. And then it forms that bond between you and that other person. And then it goes into the sunny skies. But without that sense of connection, it's not gonna move. It's not about finding a solution to the stress. It's about not being alone in the problem. And that's what moves it from the storms to the blue skies. And honestly, that's one of the only things that does. I've had the chance to be in a lot of different clinical situations. And I would say that's the most common denominator I've found. I mean, of course, there's going to be some outliers there, but almost always, if people truly don't feel alone in it, then their brain can transition, because you're speaking to that primitive brain that they're not alone. And to the primitive brain, alone is threatening. Alone is dangerous. Alone might not be survivable. So it's all about, changing our responses to vulnerability. Now, this is not just a choice. This is something we have to experience. Our ability to do this has a lot to do with how much people have done it with us. Being able to do this with people is like having a gift. We have what we've been given to give. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you build that if you're not in a scenario where people are likely to turn towards your vulnerability instead of against or away from it. But you can't talk someone in to doing this with you. You can't tell them that they need to do this with you and then have it happen. You've got to do it with them. It's an experiential thing. And as you sit in those vulnerable moments with them, just wanting to be in the moment with them, and really opening space for that, they'll be a lot more likely to do it with you. And this is one thing that's, again, tricky about, family dynamics, is that we don't necessarily get to choose the garden of our relationship. I'm sure, each of us have had experiences like, I did not know that this was in the cards. When I formed this relationship with this person, I had no idea that this was in the cards. And we find ourselves in those moments with like, we never saw this coming. And so we don't, I have a lot of people ask me, where's my white picket fence? Like, I kind of had it all planned out. I saw how it would go, and I saw the garden I would grow. And the reality is that none of us got an empty plot of land when we walked into a relationship. There were these attachment styles that have been passed down about 3 generations. These patterns go on for about 150 years because, grandparents, parents, grandchildren, it's about 3 generations that these go for. They can be infused and changed at any time, but they're very solid. And so it's not so much that we go to this nice little plot of land and figure out what we're going to plant. It's more like we come across this, I call it the attachment heirloom garden of like, there's all this stuff growing in here. And some of it, I don't know what to do. Actually, okay, a lot of it, I don't know what to do with it. I never saw that in my garden, my little relationship. So I'm kind of at a loss here. And so we're going to talk about how you can change your heirloom gardens. But you can't root everything out. It's a different process. You have to infuse things rather than just try to pull them out. And a lot of it has to do with the way that you respond to others and their vulnerability. So again, we do this with ourselves. So if you're in a scenario where you don't have someone in your life that will do this with you, and honestly, I think we all have times like that where it's like, I don't know about you, but one thing that's really frustrating and hard for me is, hearing all this great advice that's so not applicable. It was like, I don't mind sharing this when I was pregnant and exhausted. And I'd have the doctor say, well, make sure you get plenty of sleep, and make sure that you eat healthy. And it's like, do you have any idea what my life really looks like? Like plenty of sleep is so off the table, and like healthy eating left like 5 months ago. And like, that's not my life. I don't have that life. So I know that I'm wondering, I wish so bad I could see you guys and get a sense of like how this is settling. But I just know that for so many of us, we're in seasons in our lives or maybe long stints in our lives where we don't have somebody that will do this with us. Their patterns around vulnerability are really rigid. But if we can just do it with ourselves, we can turn towards our vulnerability. That engages a lot of self-empathy. A lot of it has to do, again, not so much about trying to convince yourself that you've got to change the problems in your life, but just making space for the emotions around the problems. So if you can turn towards yourself, you're going to be a lot more likely to be able to turn towards others. And as you turn towards others, you're growing that person's capacity literally within their brain to turn towards you. There's something within the brain that's called a mirror neuron. And it's part of our brain that's developed when people get down on our level and we can feel their empathetic responses. And when they get down on our level and we can feel their empathetic responses, there are literally neurons that start growing in the brain that help us to be able to empathize with others. If you didn't have a lot of that growing up, being able to do this is going to be like a foreign language. It's not going to have any familiarity whatsoever. So if there's someone in your life that you're trying to do this, that you wish would do it with you, if you do it with them, you're growing their mirror neurons, because those can grow at any time. And so again, we grow these things like a plant that we nurture consistently over time. In terms of creating connection, one of the core things I wanted to make sure we had time to cover was we got to be aware of the part of the body we're really dealing with. Calming the body down is huge in terms of creating connection. And so when someone's in a big fight or flight moment, and one thing I would really challenge you guys, all of us, me included, is that we know the fight or flight responses well of our loved ones, that we want to have a really good sense of when they're getting there. It's mostly, it's going to look a little different for each person. That's why it's so important that we're aware. But one thing that we need to know, and I hope you guys don't take offense to this, but I kind of consider almost all of us that when we're in a fight or flight moment, we're kind of like this dog, right? We're going to bite or we're going to run, and we're going to do one of those two things. Another, and it's important to just be mindful that that's really the part of the brain that you're dealing with. Any type of logical thinking, any type of nice problem solving abilities is really out the window when someone's in fight or flight. And so any time spent there is pretty much going to be futile. And so if you can respect the fact that when they're in fight or flight, they're going to do one of those two things. They're either going to bite or they're going to flee. And the other thing that we really need to be mindful of is that when you're in fight or flight, the sense that others know you vanishes. So it's very much like coming across this dog that does not know you. Because the idea that people understand us, also when we're in fight or flight, we don't think people understand us, even if they do. We don't think they do. We feel like that they're unfamiliar to us. It's just part of that fight or flight brain. And so if we approach them like we would an angry, scared dog that we don't know, so we come in slow and low. I call it slow and low. If you were to run in and just give this dog a hug, chances are it'd be an unpleasant experience. Maybe the fight or flight isn't quite that strong. Maybe you could come and give a hug, but you want to just come slowly, as close as they'll allow you, and then respect the boundary that they place. They might not want a hug because you have no idea what's really been activated. One thing that you need to know about fight or flight is that most of what they're in fight or flight about has probably very little to do with you. It might, but it's definitely not only to do with you, because the brain is, is pulling up all these other networks that are lighting up as things get triggered. And so it's all about, moving from this place of like, don't touch me, to being able to get close enough. So slow and low. We also, we don't want to use a lot of words. And so we're going to go a little bit more into these steps here in a minute. So one thing that's really important about vulnerability and realizing that your vulnerability is my threat. Have you ever wondered why the loved ones in your life can get along so well with people they don't know, like people at work and their friends, and like people who don't, they've never done anything for them. And why do they get to be treated so kindly? And it's so confusing to us. The reality is because when we're close to someone, those that we love, their vulnerability to our fight or flight brain feels like a threat. And so that's part of how like these conflict cycles, they kind of escalate, because we see their threat, their vulnerability as our threat. So we've got to calm our body down. We've got to calm their bodies down. And so, one of the most pivotal ways that we create connection is just having our bodies be calm in the presence of their vulnerability. If we can even just do that one part, then we can do a lot to get the storm moving through. It's important to know, I'm kind of going a little bit faster because I know I'm getting to the place where I need to do questions and stuff, but so offloading stress is part of how the body moves towards calm. It might seem like all these kind of behaviors are unhelpful, unproductive, that there's no rhyme or reason to them, and there's no need for them. Actually, neurologically, there is. It needs to offload it. And as it offloads it in the presence of connection, eventually it calms down. It's that in the presence of connection that's core, because if it's offloading it in isolation, it's not going to calm down. But if it's offloading it in the presence of connection, eventually, most often, it will calm down. So just knowing that offloading is messy, it needs to offload it. I don't know about you, but conflict is a lot easier for me to manage when I recognize that there's a purpose to it. Like when I try to tell myself that my kids should never throw tantrums, and me and my husband should never get in arguments, and like there should never, like, then it just feels like all the times when those things are happening, something's wrong. And that just activates my fight or flight even more. But if I can recognize that there's a purpose to this, and that if I can just stay connected enough to them, especially through safe physical proximity, that eventually they'll calm down. And hopefully maybe we can even form a bond in the moment of that vulnerability that's going to help us get to the next blue sky. Then the conflict doesn't feel so frustrating. It's almost like, honestly, the way that I try to view it is like every time one of my kids melts, it's like, okay, here's my opportunity. Or every time that there's some other type of conflict, is like, okay, here's my chance. Here's my chance. So recognizing that conflict are your opportunities to change the attachment pattern, to change how people turn towards vulnerability, because as you do it with them, you grow their ability to do it with you. Okay, we kind of talked a little bit about this. We've talked a little bit about safe physical. I love how the little baby is just kind of touching the fingers. One thing I would really, really suggest is if you've come in to give a hug to someone who's in fight or flight and they say no, don't go too far away. Just because someone says no in a vulnerable moment doesn't mean they want you to go away. I would just back up a little bit and then stay as close as they'll let you stay. Because one thing that happens in conflict is that, we try to get close. It's that person's not ready for that level of connection. They push away, but then we go all the way out and then they're isolated again. And when they're isolated, the brain doesn't calm down. So it stays in that cycle of the storm just continuing. And again, this is across the lifespan. It's for every age group. We don't outgrow this. One quick thing is that whatever gets stuck, like a river, whatever gets stuck gets revisited. We talked a little bit about this. So say there's a conflict, it's peaking, the thunder and the lightning starting to form, and we stop it. There's a really good chance the next time there's a conflict, it's going to go right back to that point. And it's just going to get revisited. And then it's going to backlog all the other stress that never gets a chance to offload. And so a lot of helping the body to process stress and the mind to process stress is by allowing it to process through in the presence of connection, so that things can actually settle down and flow. It's not what I said, it's how I feel. Again, we don't want to use a lot of language. Language is confusing to a fight or flight brain. That's why you can't talk your way through conflict. You've got to connect your way through conflict. And so, and a lot of times, like if you are trying to use a lot of words, chances are that you're going to feel like people are speaking different languages. Have you ever felt that way in a conflict? It's like, how can this not be clear? Like this is obvious. This is totally obvious. How can you not see this? And it's because we're trying to use language that in that moment, their brain can't recognize it. We don't understand logic when we're in fight or flight. It's irrelevant to us. And so again, using that body to create that safe physical proximity so that the brain can shift gears. And the really cool thing about that, so that we have tunnel vision when we're in conflict. And we can really, and we have to recognize that we're both in fight or flight. When there's conflict, we're both in fight or flight because your vulnerability is my threat. And so we have tunnel vision, and you have to choose. You can only see one of two things. You can either see the person or you can see the problem. And I would really challenge you to try to see the person and just create empathetic space for that person, because as you see that person, they'll eventually over time be able to see their problem differently. And the other thing that happens is that you most likely won't be primed as the problem. And that part's pretty significant as well. So I think just kind of in closing, and I know I'm out of time here, whoops. So there's just a few last things: mirroring, matching, making sure that we kind of calm that body down. And I think that's it. Okay, so I'm gonna go to questions and answers. Let's see here, I got something in the chat here. So I don't see any questions. So let me ask you, is there any questions that people have? I've got one that just says, is the and I'm not sure. Okay, let me think here. So yes, in terms of being able to, I got lots of questions. Okay, one thing that I just need to know is, as I open that question and answer box, are all of the, like, am I the only one that can see the question and answers? Are you able to answer that for me?
Yeah, I can type in some of the answers about like recordings and whatnot, and you can go ahead and answer the questions about the topic.
Okay, so it's okay for me to kind of click on this question and answer, and you guys can't see that part?
No, they'll see the questions that you answer live when you click the button answer live.
Okay, so how
so if you want, so anyone here who wants to ask a question, try to ask in the Q&A feature. I'm seeing some pop in the chat. Dr. Jones, you can look in the chat, but we'll try to keep them in the Q&A box. So when you want to answer a question, click answer live, and then everyone can see that question that you're answering.
Okay, so I can, yeah, so I'm so sorry about this, guys. So I click on the question and answer, and then I answer live. Yep. And then that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, so is it possible to get a recording of this? That's the first question. Camilla, can you answer that question? I actually don't know.
Yeah, I'll answer all these questions in the chat, the ones about like recordings and things like that, and you can answer questions about the topic.
Okay. Yeah. So then so one of the questions is, how can this offloading be encouraged in children in a healthy way? Such a good question. So again, it's okay. So define healthy. Like, I think one of the things that we often struggle with is, at least I do. I can't speak for everybody else, but I do it with my kids. I think that whatever behaviors they currently have are permanent in their lives. So if they're throwing tantrums now, that means in 5 years from now, they're going to be doing the same thing. And the reality is that we mature up through our, there's a really cool saying that says we all grow old, but we don't all grow up. And our capacity to grow up and to make space for empathy towards others, and to eventually learn how to change our offloading process in a way that's respectful and kind, has everything to do with the extent to which others turn towards our vulnerability when we're young. And so in terms of what's considered to be disrespectful or unhealthy in children, a lot of what I thought was disrespectful or unhealthy in children actually turns out to just be a need for offloading. And I don't know if you can think back on your experiences with people, but when you respond to someone's offloading in a very kind and respectful way, not always, but when you're just really forming those connections, they tend to self-correct better than if we try to correct about what they should do. So I would say, what healthy looks like to me as an attachment therapist and researcher is just, again, as much as possible, that safe physical proximity in the presence of offloading and not a lot of talking. It's not a time to do teaching about how people should offload stress. That's the opportunity for that is in blue skies. Blue skies are our teaching moments. Offloading moments are when we connect. And the more that we connect in our offloading moments, the more teaching space we have. And so anything that isn't harmful, anything that isn't causing danger to somebody, anything that's not abusive, I would say as much as you can, try to get that safe physical proximity, try to move towards that vulnerability, because that will help them grow up through their vulnerability. And it will increase their capacity to have those mirror neurons that they're then able to respond in empathetic ways progressively over time. So I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah, so if a child is throwing a fit, is it best to let them write it out as they offload? Yes. So Patty Wimpler, there's so many incredible theorists out there that have really figured out this neurobiology thing. So if a child is having a fit, absolutely. If it's not causing harm, if it's not dangerous, if it's not abusive in any way, and allowing them to kind of process that, because if they're going to process it, either it's going to come out then, or it's going to come out in the next fit. But if you allow that them to process it, and again, that's not the time to step in and say what they should or shouldn't be doing in offloading, because their brain is not going to process it. So you want to have that safe physical proximity, let them know that you're there. And this is confusing, and this is a really important part. Sometimes what happens is that when people start offloading and then they get connection, the storm gets louder. And that can be really counterintuitive. It's like, I'm trying to connect with you. Why are you yelling at me more? That's actually the storm progressing. That is the storm progressing. And eventually it will turn if there's connection. There are some scenarios where that's not the case, like abusive patterns, or if we've got some antisocial personality stuff or ODD types of things where people's capacity to have empathy is really in a different spectrum, then it's going to be a little bit different. And that's kind of the role that therapists play and being able to help you fine tune that. But in general, the more that if it starts to get louder, when you connect, just know that that's more of the storm coming out. And honestly, the more you can get of the storm at once, the better, because that's going to mean that you have a longer space of blue skies. Those are very correlated with one another. The bigger the storm, and the bigger the connection within the storm, the longer the blue skies. So I don't know if that kind of answered that question.
I'm going to pop in really quick and just I wanted to let you know, I saw a question down here. Someone asked if you could back up to the previous slide.
Yeah. I'm sorry here. Is that the one that this one?
I guess we'll see. But yeah, they said the previous slide. So I'm assuming that one. And then also make sure to indicate when you've finished answering the question so everyone can see the question.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I don't think that I got back to the right slide. I am so sorry. So this one is really, I think I'm going to answer this one here. So how do we actually move towards addressing the conflict? Okay, so let's talk for a moment about there's different types of conflict. There's core conflict, then there's ancillary conflicts. And I'm going to be willing to bet, because I've honestly never seen this to not be the case, is that the core conflict is that people feel alone. So there's never just one conflict. You know, we're always dealing with multiple at the same time. But the core one is typically a sense of being alone. So if you can change that piece, then sometimes, and I've seen this happen in surprising ways, that if you can change that sense of being alone, then the other problems change too. If you can, the biggest problem is how to get that brain out of fight or flight. That's your very first focus. Because if you can get it out of fight or flight while that person feels connected to you, then their parasympathetic response will start activating, which includes their prefrontal cortex, however much they have one. Because, by the way, the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until 23. So if you're dealing with a teen, if you're dealing with a little one, just know there's not going to be a lot of logic in what they do. And that's okay. Developmentally, it's appropriate. They're going to do what feels good, what sounds good, what the amygdala is just so where they make decisions. But again, that doesn't mean that they want to feel connected in those emotional decisions, irrational decisions. And so I would say, how do you really get to the core of the conflict? First, you form a connection. You do all that you can to have that safe physical proximity. Then you help them to get their prefrontal cortex online. And if they're older than 23, there's a good chance that can involve quite a bit of logic. And as they get that logic, then the other conflict starts to change. I've seen that process happen in a lot of different ways. Okay, another question here is, can you give an example of applying this in an argument with a spouse? Yes, absolutely. So I would say argument with a spouse, very first step, whenever there's an argument, there's fight or flight. So the first thing you want to do as you step into an argument with anyone, especially your spouse, is ask yourself, what's their body language telling me? Are they in fight or flight or not? You also need to know that men and women have very different brains in lots of different ways. But one thing that is generally true about a male versus a female brain, and I know that there's a big spectrum there, but this is just from one line of research, is that a male brain tends to flood to fight or flight quicker and stays there longer, and struggles more in calming itself down. And so safe physical proximity may be even more important to those brains that flood quicker, stay flooded longer, and have a harder time calming down. So first step as you walk into an argument is you want to get a sense of where that person is in fight or flight. And if they're highly in fight or flight, again, you want to have that safe physical proximity. So instead of jumping into, why did you just give me the dagger eyes and what's wrong, what's going on? Stop offloading your stress on me. I'm not ready to have this, I'm exhausted. I can't really take this as well as what I'm, handling with the kids and all that kind of stuff. Before we go in there, if we can just move towards them, like a gentle touch on the arm, a quick back rub. Again, if someone pushes back, then don't go all the way away. Stay as close as they'll let you stay, and then give a few moments for your bodies to learn how to be around one another when you're in stress, and then go from there. Sometimes that might alone be the most efficient thing that you can do, because when you're trying to change conflict patterns and you're trying to rewire the brain, it's all about what happens in real time. Trying to talk about the last argument doesn't do a lot of rewiring. Changing it in the present moment does. And that's why therapy is tricky. Unless there's a storm brewing in the office, there's some access points within the brain that they're not activated. You can't rewire them. And so a lot of this has to do with what happens in the day in, day out of our lives. So again, and then if you do get a moment where things do become a little bit more verbal, focusing more on that, I just want to be in this moment with you. Those are the most powerful words you could probably say, and just give it a few seconds of I just want to be in this moment with you. Okay, let's go down a little bit. This is another question here. So it says, in regards to children, when they get upset, I send mine to their rooms when they're mad. Would it be better for them to be outside more? Honestly, yeah, I do believe. When you're talking about resilience, if you want to build a resilient brain, you want to build a brain that's primed to connect. How many times when we're stressed as adults do we feel like we're supposed to do it solo? I've got to figure this out. I don't want to burden anybody with my problems. If I do, they're going to think I'm inadequate, and that just fuels the fight or flight. The more that we can teach them and train them to seek connection when they are stressed, the more we build a resilient brain. And this part's actually really important, because one thing that's really hard about attachment is that there's a lot of competition. So if you think about social media, there's all these, so-called bids for connection. But if you have safe physical proximity is one of the things that you're teaching your kids to want, that means there's only those that are immediately around them that they're really going to seek comfort from. There's a lot of protection in that. Learning how to turn towards those that we're physically around, and teaching and training us and ourselves to turn towards those that we're physically around is pivotal in a couple of ways. One, your brain cannot build the neurochemicals it needs to calm down alone. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that stuff develops in a relationship, not in safe physical proximity. And so if we can teach, especially our teens, if we can teach them to seek safe physical proximity, that kind of cuts out anything on a screen, and is pretty big in terms of teaching people attachment skills. So I would say, yeah, as much as possible. And I know it's loud, it's messy, and it's those moments of like, is this really what it's supposed to look like? I mean, this is insane, right? It's hard because it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be that way, because a lot of us we didn't grow up that way. We got sent to our rooms. I don't want to say one way is wrong or the other, but I think there's been a lot of messages over time historically that have been like, you're supposed to figure this out on your own. And a primitive brain, our brains were not designed to figure it out on our own. There's nothing about that really builds resiliency. Okay, I've got it. Oh my goodness, we're out of time. Okay, I think maybe I've got time for one more. It says here, I'll answer this one live. It says, what would you suggest one should do to process through storms that were shut down prematurely? Yeah, they will resurface on their own. Resentment, pain, rage, I can kind of consider all that to be trapped pain, neurologically within the brain, physically in the body, emotionally in the mind. And so I can guarantee you that if safe physical proximity is there, eventually people are going to revisit those storms that were prematurely shut down, because we want connection so deeply and so badly. And really recognizing that if you invite that connection and the storm gets louder at first, knowing that that's actually not a bad sign, again, unless things are getting dangerous, sometimes that is what that is. It's like, oh my gosh, if you're going to listen, let me unload all this other stuff that couldn't be unloaded before. And so, it continues to kind of roll through. So again, just stay as close as they'll let you stay. Focus on that safe physical proximity. So this is a really important question as well. And Camilla, I'm going to let you cut me off when we need to be done. I'm going to answer this one live. It says, when does offloading turn into abuse? That's a really important question. Honestly, I think that that's not a black or white question. I think that there's a lot of gray in that. Anything, of course, that's dangerous, anything that would physically harm somebody, that needs to have boundaries around it. If you're dealing with a little one, then that's different in terms of age, what's age appropriate with that. If someone's like throwing a shoe, there's a difference between that versus, other harmful things that they can do. So I would say that is something that, oh man, that's something that I think has too many grays to like answer in one specific question. But again, I think the biggest things to be aware of is someone being harmed. Is anything dangerous happening? Is there any, like life or death type of thing? If those things are not happening, then, emotional abuse is different. Those things might not be present when there's emotional abuse, but this is the one thing to remember. As you calm your body and brain down in the presence of their vulnerability, you protect your brain from being hurt by their vulnerability. Because when you're in fight or flight, what they say and do goes back deep. And so no matter what they're doing, if you can calm your brain and your body down in the presence of their vulnerability, even if it is abusive, you're providing a buffer for the brain, and keeping it out of fight or flight. So either way, calming your body down is protective of you and most often protective of the relationship. But when it turns into abuse is something that is so, I think, unique for each different situation. Let's see here. I think there's this, am I good to answer one more question, Camilla?
Yes, I was just about to say, let's do one more question.
Okay, I'll just do this one. It says, what do you believe is the percentage of people who can overcome the storm without the external support you are proposing, and those who can overcome on their own? So I think, again, our capacity to do this grows over time. It's not a checkbox. It's not like, yes, I can do it, or no, I cannot. Neurologically in the brain, we grow these capacities over time. So we grow our capacity to turn towards ourselves in self-empathy. The more we turn towards ourselves in self-empathy, the more we grow our capacity to do that with others. And so it's kind of like this chain reaction. So I would say that all of us can change, like neurologically, because of neuroplasticity, that the brain gets better at doing what it does a lot of. We can all change these capacities and become better with them. Now, what that looks like for each person is different, because we really have different, all of our neurobiology is very unique. But I would say that's one of the things that I love the most about this, is that we can always grow that capacity within ourselves and with other people, because just neuroplastically, that's always going to be an option. So I know we're out of time. I have so valued this time with you. Thank you so much for spending this time. And I have a podcast. This is the type of stuff we go over in my podcast. So if you have questions that I haven't answered, each week or every other week, we've got like some new content that's very consistent with what I've just presented here. So come and follow me on my podcast if that's something that interests you, and we'll just continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. This was incredibly informational and educational. There was a large number of questions, and I'm so sorry we're not able to get to all of them, but I really hope that as you review the recording, which I'll be sending out tomorrow, you'll be able to hopefully get some more questions answered. Sorry, go ahead.
You can also email me. I would be more than happy to email, like answer any questions you have via email. So Camille, go ahead and give them my email address. And if you have questions I couldn't answer, just email me.
Okay, perfect. So everyone who registered for this webinar, when you get the link to the recording tomorrow, I'll make sure to include Dr. Jones's email as well, so for questions. And I just wanted to add really quick, when you sign off, you'll see a survey pop up. We'd love to have you give us your feedback. Tell us if it was helpful or not. We're trying to improve our services, and to get your feedback would be really valuable. So please fill that out when you get the chance, or when it pops up. And then also, this webinar is approved for a continuing education credit. So if you are looking to get a certificate for that, you can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu, or when you get your email tomorrow, it's going to come from the same email, and you can respond to that and request the certificate. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. This was just wonderful. And thank you so much again, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you. I love doing this.
This was the best.
Please email me if you have questions. Let's just continue the conversation. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.